Hello and welcome to the last in the series of our Leveling Up webinars. We're excited to be joined today by MZ's Executive VP of Global Operations, Andy Derman, and also Duncan Brown, who is our VP of Global Innovation. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please put them in the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will endeavour to get back to those at the end of the presentation. We will be sharing the recording of today's presentation and the slides in a follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. So without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Andy. Hi.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, and hello, everyone. Welcome. Hello from a sunny Basingstoke in Hampshire, and I have my good friend and colleague Duncan Brown with me from Leicestershire. Hey, Duncan.
Good afternoon, Andy. It's kind of intermittently sunny here, so we'll see.
So that's a win then. Marvelous. So yeah, good stuff. Well, very excited to have you all joining us today for our webinar as we round off this mini series on the leveling up agenda, and we got some fantastic content and some amazing graphs and charts and data points coming your way. But before we dive into that, just wanted to update you on some relatively new news. As many of you will be aware, about a year ago now, and I can't believe it was a year already, the MZ and Burning Glass came together globally to combine different efforts on a similar mission around really illuminating what's happening in the labour market to help organisations like yours make more informed decisions about the labour market based on good, robust local information. MZ and Burning Glass have been very much leaders in the field, and we've brought these worlds together to really combine different skill sets and expertise to drive forward that mission and allow us to really double down on being the best globally in class. And the last year has a lot of work has been going on to knit together the great assets on both sides, and we're largely now coming to the point where those worlds have been well and truly integrated. We've got some great new teams pulled together, some data and tools that are starting to knit together. And so as a business, we now enter a very exciting phase, which is really about reflecting on and looking back towards what got us to this point and bringing MZ and Burning Glass together to form MZ Burning Glass, but really now start to draw a line under that and look forward. And so really exciting. As of late yesterday, we launched our new identity, and we are now Lightcast. So really excited to have a new, fresh and very vibrant image for you folks. And so welcome to our new world of Lightcast as we push forward on that same noble key mission that we're so enthusiastic about, and we love to work with you on around really illuminating what's happening in the labour market. All the puns are coming out, I apologize, but shining a light on what is happening in the labour market and really helping you, our important key stakeholders and partners and customers who are driving massive missions in your own communities to really help make better decisions, help drive education to align with the ever-changing world of work and localizing that connection there, helping job seekers, current and future, to chart a path through the labour market and into prosperity, and helping regions to really unlock the great opportunities that the talent and capabilities of a region possess, but also help shape economies as the world changes in ever more complex and fast-moving ways to really make sure that we're well placed as individuals as well as communities and institutions to take advantage of the great opportunities and to manage through challenge. And of course, there are plenty of opportunities and no shortage of challenge right now when it comes to the labour market here in the UK, but all around the world. So you'll be seeing a lot more red from us in due course, but we're very excited to bring our new identity that's really about forging forward and pushing on. So we have new web infrastructure coming through. So lightcast.io is our new URL. The old website will redirect, so get you to the right place. And bear with us, we've landed the initial pages. There's still work to do to unpick and build that content, but it does create a new platform for us to push forward, and we've got some very exciting plans afoot as we bring the new brand to bear. You'll see our social media accounts changing from MZ Burning Glass to Lightcast. Our email addresses are changing, and our products are gradually being recolored and restyled to align with the new branding. But new, fresh look, new name, same mission, same challenge. Obviously, amazingly, the same people, but really looking to push forward. So you'll see more in due course as we run through. But it's great to be looking forward into our new Lightcast world. And I know, Duncan, you're just as excited as I am about the whole thing.
Of course I am. Yeah, absolutely. I've got a new shirt to prove it. Look,
we've got new t-shirts, other swag will be arriving in due course. But it's been fun as a business working that through, and it's exciting we can now share that with you. We had our launch party a few weeks ago internally, a beautiful sunny day in my back garden, where we had a lovely barbecue, and we celebrated the successes we've had and the work that we've done and the impact that we've had in collaboration with our customers. I'm very excited about moving forward.
I think you could confess to having a balloon arch in your back garden for that purpose as well. It was quite a thing of glory.
Keep an eye on my LinkedIn page and our LinkedIn page. I think more now that we're allowed to share it, more of that incriminating evidence will be flowing, no doubt. So fun times. Anyway, on with the show. Enough about us, and onwards with our topic at hand. So as I mentioned, and Debbie mentioned at the outset, we're pulling together the final strands of this stage of our focus on the leveling up agenda. And over the last few months now, we've been reflecting on the pertinent points from the white paper, illuminating some of the elements that we've taken interest in from a labour market perspective, and sharing some data and insight, which I hope is garnering interest on your side and helping you think a little bit about how you can unpick and exploit the opportunities that the focus on leveling up is pushing, and continue to want to showcase resources and thinking on this topic. Now, this topic isn't going to go away for some time, one imagines, and so whilst this mini series comes to an end, I think what we'll find is we're moving to an agenda where leveling up becomes part of the general mix of our discussion as we go through, and we still have a number of resources on their way that you will no doubt be able to access, and hopefully will be helpful to your thinking on this topic as we all push forward. So it's at this point I'm going to bring Duncan properly back to what he does best, which is explaining amazing data in different colors this time, Duncan. So enjoy that.
I had to get used to a whole new palette and typefaces and all the rest of it. So let's see how we go. So yeah, let's start with a chart that is a version of which we've used many times.
An old favorite.
Bit of context, or they have added an extra series onto it. So this is a version of this we used a lot in 2021 and a bit at the start of this year to really just track the recovery from the pandemic and all its effects. And I thought it was worth showing here in its own right, because it's quite interesting to see that we now sit at a time where unemployment is back down to the very low levels that we saw before the pandemic. It's pretty much the effect of COVID is gone. And vacancies, although they're tailing off now, remain at extremely high levels on the ONS measure. That's the purple line there. Levels that we've not really seen historically until late last year. And so, that's quite an interesting context. And the red line there is our own vacancy rate. So that's our job postings expressed as a share of the total size of the workforce. And you can see that they're also remaining very elevated as well, above historic norms. And I wanted to put this in, first of all, because it's good to check in anyway, but also because the whole leveling up discussion, a lot of it will get caught up with what goes on in the macroeconomy, because we've got this really tight labour market, but we also know that inflation is galloping. I think that's a fair metaphor to use. It's the highest it's been certainly since sort of the late 80s, early 90s, and that means the Bank of England is kind of itching on the trigger finger of tightening monetary policy and potentially raising interest rates to slow down demand, to bring it back under control. And of course, in the background, causing that are various shocks around energy and other raw materials as well, which make us all, in most advanced economies, potentially poorer. And of course, there's quite a wide range of scenarios that you can see unfolding in the macroeconomy over the next few years, from not too bad to quite bad. But of course, how bad things are will be a headwind to any kind of levelling up agenda. I mean, it might be more successful at levelling down in past experience, that it actually can sort of stop the growth of the areas that are tearing away. But that's not what we really want. We want sort of the potential that, it's a lot easier to reconfigure your economy when the wider economy is growing, because you can find opportunities to expand. And so, all the plans that we want to have to see regions kind of improving their economic growth, can be quite seriously disturbed depending on what goes on in the macroeconomy. And I thought that's an important context, not to sort of rush off and think, the economic problem is easily solved, when actually there's a lot of adverse climate conditions in the macroeconomy, really.
Interesting, and a great way of showing off our new colour palette as well. So well done.
I can multitask. What can I say?
So with that context, we wanted to share with you some work, a collection of work, some of which reflects on stuff that we've shared previously or slightly adapted, to really start to think about levelling up in various constituent parts. So you're going to take us on a journey through the next few slides, and we'll sort of start to tell a bit more of a rounded story, with the caveat of the macroeconomic picture in mind. But back to you, Duncan.
Yeah, so I mean, like, a lot of this is kind of bringing together threads that we've been opening across this series of webinars and bringing them back together. And so this first one here, we've shown this a couple of times in different ways, and it looks at the kind of the balance of skill supply and demand in a very rough measure. It looks at the share of workers with some higher education, basically level 4 or 5 qualifications and above, and then the share of jobs in an area which are high skilled, so supply on the one hand and demand on the other. And it allows us to create 4 quadrants where the sort of the horizontal and vertical lines represent the sort of the national average. And if you're in the top right quadrant, then you've got an above average share of working age with higher education, above average share of high skilled jobs, and you've got what's called a high skill equilibrium. And if you're in the bottom left quadrant, you're a low skill equilibrium, because you've got below average shares of each. And then top left is skill shortage. You've got more high skilled jobs relative to the average than you have people, with the requisite education and skill surplus in the bottom right. And so we've shown this before, and in common with when we've shown it before, these are local authorities across England. And what we've done this time, though, is the government have created this levelling up index, which has grouped local authorities into 3 priority groups. And to just kind of highlight how this measure maps to that, we've looked at sort of priority 1 versus priority 2 and 3. So priority 1 are those areas that the government have really highlighted for levelling up. And you can see that priority 1 are much more likely generally, with the exception of Hackney, which is that red one right at the sort of the top right. And I'll come back to why that is the case. But generally, priority 1 tend to be much more likely to be in the low skill equilibrium space. So they've got fewer skilled workers and fewer skilled jobs. And so actually, and when we've discussed this before, we really honed in on this, that the real challenge is that moving in either supply or demand on its own is quite hard. That's why the 2 off diagonal quadrants are quite lightly populated, that actually you need to kind of balance supply and demand together. So you need to grow industries that create the kinds of jobs that you're after, and grow workers with the kind of skills that those jobs need. And so the challenge for levelling up areas is how you can kind of break out of this kind of equilibrium at the low skill end, to actually unlock demand and supply on a similar trajectory to sort of move toward the top right. I'll just mention briefly why Hackney's at the top there. That's the government's prioritisation brings together a range of indicators, some of which are about the causes of levelling up, and that's what we tend to focus on more in this discussion, but some of them are about the consequences. So you've got an area like Hackney, which has actually got some quite impressive economic dimensions to it, but has also got a high level of deprivation within it. You know, quite a few local authorities in London have this kind of cheek by jowl sort of poverty and wealth thing, and it's kind of it's a frequent thing in very large cities, and so that's why Hackney is up there at the top right, because it's got lots of high-skilled workers and lots of high-skilled jobs, but it's in priority one because it also scores poorly on a few metrics that have been used by the government in defining those levelling up groups.
Duncan, an interesting observation, just thinking about obviously the cluster and concentration of those priority one areas in the low skill equilibrium range, which is not a surprise. It's interesting to see you know, relatively decent proportion in the skills shortage area. So these would be localities that have a decent amount of high skilled job demand, but perhaps not necessarily the resident population the constituent high skilled skill base, and so that's maybe a of trying to really attract, potentially as an attraction of people, of higher skilled people in to live within an area, or it could well be that that need is being met through commuting, people who live outside of the area more.
Because it's at the local authority level, you can get a bit of a commuting dimension to it. There's also another side. The most outlying skill shortage one is Copeland, and when we did this chart last time, I think we talked about it. Copeland's where you've got kind of Sellafield and all of that, so it's got quite a high-end, high-skill workforce, but a lot of those jobs aren't necessarily higher education dependent. Actually, they're kind of, you know, they're developed through other skill routes. So all metrics are to some extent an approximation, but you do get these outliers sometimes. But yeah, that's the main point from it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this next one is really just to kind of give a sense of the differences in kind of vigour in labour markets, really. And rather than using the levelling up priority groups, which is, for reasons we were just talking about, can often be quite confusing, we wanted to focus here on the sort of the rural versus urban dimension. And so the x-axis here is the number of job postings per 100 jobs. So as you go higher, you've got a much more high turnover labour market, which of course means you're refreshing the labour market more quickly. You know, if you've got say, you know, getting on for 100 job postings per 100 jobs, that means that 1 in 10 jobs are being advertised online every year. Whereas if you're down below the 25 level, that means 1 in 40 jobs are being advertised every year. And so it gives you a sense of how quickly you can kind of transform your labour market. And then on the y-axis there, we've got the sort of the share of job postings that are in high skill categories as well, to give a sense of the value there. And we've done the rural-urban distinction because it's quite interesting. And of course, a lot of the time when we talk about levelling up, we talk about left behind areas, and we think about the sort of the provincial towns and that kind of thing. And what you see here is that rural areas are heavily concentrated in this bottom left quadrant, which are those areas which have got low turnover and a relatively low share of high-skilled jobs in them. And so the labour market isn't changing very quickly, and is actually kind of, you know, when you think about the low-skill equilibrium point, actually they are very much going to find it hard to break out of that cycle, because these are areas that, you know, aren't changing their labour market very quickly, but typically have got less than half of job postings in high-skilled jobs.
Interesting. Playing devil's advocate a little bit here, would there be some element of perhaps the more rural-centered economy that's less likely to use online job postings to advertise for roles? There may be more kind of family linked networks.
That's true. I mean, when you talk about agricultural jobs, but even within rural areas, for the most part, agricultural jobs tend to be a relatively small share of the total. And what you tend to find is, you know, and this has always been true, is that urban areas are just much more quickly changing, because that's kind of the nature of them. Labour markets are more porous, it's easy to move from one job to another, whereas rural areas tend to be more settled. But insofar as many rural areas do have levelling up challenges, which they do, then that kind of slower change will make it harder to kind of see a drive a change through the demand side.
Unfair of me to throw this on you right now, but hey, that's my job. It'd be interesting to see how many of those rural areas also tag up with priority 1 areas, or whether they are the flip side of it, because potentially quite desirable places to be located in, and could well be very much those areas that are driving the commuters who reside in pleasant rural areas into those skill shortage areas, perhaps, to help with that equilibrium. But it'd be interesting to see how the rural versus priority 1 switch across. Are they very much the same place, or are they two sides of the same coin?
I think our next chart will help shed some light on the split there, actually, because I think because we split them by both rural and urban and the priority groups as well. And so because you're right that a lot of rural areas don't have levelling up challenges. You've got places like Winchester down the road from Basingstoke, which is quite a prosperous and productive place. South Oxfordshire is another one. You've got those kind of places that do figure in there, and then you've got other places sort of like Fenland and Tendring that don't perform as well. And so there is a mix there. I think that the previous analysis is about the ability to sort of see change. This analysis looks at a different question, which is about the sort of the economic makeup of areas. And so we use what's called an economic complexity index. And so what that seeks to do is look at industry structure and how industries interrelate to kind of get at what the sort of the network of knowledge is. So areas that score highly on the economic complexity indicator have got concentrations of industry that are generating lots of knowledge, and there's good evidence that tracks productivity and growth. And so what we've done here is we've constructed that complexity indicator in 2003 and then 2019. And in both cases, a 0 is the national average for that year. And so obviously, if you score above the diagonal, then you've improved. If you're below the diagonal, then you've declined. What you see is that there's a strong diagonal in each case, that actually it's quite hard to sort of change your economic complexity. Not impossible, as we'll talk about in a moment. But what you can also see is that urban areas really seem to have a much greater upside. Rural areas are much more tightly concentrated around the average, whereas it's urban areas, especially those around London. If you look on the right-hand side where we've got the urban areas, you can see, I think the two top ones there are City of London and Tower Hamlets. You've got Southwark, Camden, Westminster up there, and then again that highest positioned red one to the top right is Hackney for the same reason. And so you get that, and they're all significantly more complex economies than any of the rural areas are, because actually getting to that kind of place pretty much requires you to be a major urban area, because you get those kind of agglomeration externalities where you've got lots of different industries all interacting. And really this gives a sense of that you have to think about where your future trajectory lies as an area. That is, it's very difficult to imagine if you're a low scoring area on economic complexity now, very difficult to imagine how you could get to the level that you see in kind of the City of London and Tower Hamlets, because there's this huge metropolis around them. And so actually you need to compare yourself with similar areas and think about how places with similar industry structures but somewhat more complex and differentiated ones allow you models to improve. And improvement is possible, as I said about the sort of the diagonal there. You can see a few areas that are quite significantly more complex in 2019 than they were in 2003. I mean, some of those big red areas, which are priority 1 areas, include sort of Manchester, which is the sort of the highest one up there. Leeds is there, Nottingham, Newcastle. So they've all seen from 2003 to 2019 a significant improvement in their relative economic complexity, which means that they have been able to deliver some improvements in their economic performance through that time. And so how much we can learn from those for other areas, especially those that aren't necessarily got some big urban centres, is really important for the levelling up conversation.
It's really interesting. I mean, often we think of complexity as a negative, but it's very much a positive here when you, in terms of the links into economic performance. And I suppose the great challenge, you mentioned a few examples of areas that have certainly increased their complexity above the diagonal. And I imagine these things don't just happen by accident or in a small space of time. They will be taking a concerted effort, and will take, you've got a 16-year period, haven't you, on this graph? They genuinely will take 10 to 20 years to really realize those big policies and strategies coming into fruition and turning. I mean, Leeds is a great example, isn't it, of somewhere that's really doubled down on the tech industry and linked in to financial services and other pieces that then fall from that have clearly increased their complexity and is meaning that Leeds is very much a thriving area in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go back sort of 30 some odd years, Leeds had a lot of economic problems, whereas now it's actually got quite a substantial high value service sector there. And that's a real achievement, and you can see that coming through on this data. And similarly, Manchester and Newcastle have also grown those things. But I think what the economic complexity indicator gets at is that it's not just getting the odd random factory or office in your area. It's actually kind of accumulating a cluster of capabilities in different industries that link together, which give your area then a real kind of competitive advantage as a location, which then starts that virtuous circle where you get more and more investment and more job creation, and so that starts to transform the economic landscape. And and it's kind of how you sustain those changes and build those capabilities that is kind of the real challenge if you're really going to try and break out of that leveling up cycle. But I will give a quick mention to another place which isn't as big as those, because of course they're not as big as London, but Manchester, Leeds and so on are big cities. But you can see the red dot that was in that has become complex, that was low complexity before and is now somewhat above average, and that's Lincoln. So not a big city. I'm not disparaging it anyway, but it's not a big city in the normal sense. It's got many virtues to it, but it's not one of our main urban areas. But it has managed to move quite significantly up in its complexity through that time.
Interesting. I wonder if there's a correlation to football team performance here.
Yes, absolutely. We can only hope. Especially as you're a fan of Forest Green Rovers, who have been promoted again this season, I believe, haven't they?
Yeah. Ever more complex, yes. League One, here we come. So, no, very interesting, and I think this complexity piece, I think, poses lots of conversations that I think will continue long after this webinar. So, just to round off this final piece of the kind of complexity jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a slide similar to this before, but what we wanted to do was just really draw out that economic complexity point, which is, so we took the areas that in 2019 were above average in complexity, and we looked at all the other areas in England as well. And what we did was we sort of looked at the relative concentration in our Lightcast skill categories. And I nearly did say MZ Bain and Glass there, but I managed to resist it. And we've ranked them by the greatest difference between them. And so you can see at the top there, economically complex areas specialize in a certain set of skills that are very technology, creative, high knowledge content. Their design is in there, property and real estate, science and research, marketing and public relations, performing arts, which you might not associate with being particularly a high value economy, but it's the correlation that's in there. And then at the bottom end, you've got things like hospitality and food services, manufacturing and production, and so on. Now, this isn't to say that those skills are the ones that will always be associated with being high in economic complexity and low in economic complexity, but they do reflect the pattern that we have now, because the pattern is dominated by those London areas. And so London is really concentrated around its finance and property and technology sector and so on. If we're to see leveling up, part of that may be harnessing other industries, especially around high-end manufacturing, for example, which many regions are sort of trying to grow, and that might well change this kind of relationship. But the underlying point is that the sort of the industry structure is intimately connected with the talent demand that you create. And as you seek to change the industry structure, the talent demand that you create is also going to change, which then means for those in economic development or in education, you need to be thinking about how you feed the sort of the workforce needs of the future economy that you're trying to build, as well as the kind of the clear requirements now.
Chicken and egg, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful that the branding police are not observing this slide, Duncan, just looking at the bottom left corner there.
I don't know what I was thinking when I did that. It must have been late one evening. That, yeah, like I said,
one of the names rejected,
yeah.
sadly.
Yeah. I will plead still getting used to the new name.
Like we're definitely on a quest, I have to say, for sure. Quest in complexity, but no, really interesting and some fantastic food for thought. So, why not pull together a few of what you think the main takeaways are, and then we'll share some interesting resources coming that if folks are interested in this, then we can dive a little deeper in, and hopefully we'll allow them to explore further.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you give me the first one, so yeah, the kegs can remember them. The main point is that skills demand and supply both matter. So the sort of skills equilibrium picture helps us to think about that, but also so does the question of skills and economic complexity. That you can't just kind of create lots of skilled workers and if you build it they will come. It doesn't work like that. But equally, there's no point trying to create lots of new business opportunities if there's no kind of way that you've got to actually make sure they've got the talent required there. So you need to think about all these things as a whole, and not just kind of trying to do one at a time. The next one is that the underlying point about economic complexity is that there are big differences between places, and that those differences emerge over quite long periods, and they're also dependent on what's going on around them. There are London is a huge geographic cluster. You wouldn't get the economy that you get in the City of London without getting what's in Westminster and Tower Hamlets and all kinds of areas around there. There's a lot of mutual reinforcement going on, and so those differences get embedded in the industry structure. And so just sort of seeking to graft a good industry onto your industry structure isn't going to make such a huge difference. It's how you actually kind of create that sort of subtler, longer term change, that kind of network of different industries, which will really have a transformative effect. And the next one. And so, and another point that goes in with that is that you can't just think about, you can't just say, we want an economy like such and such in the abstract. A sort of a relatively kind of rural or coastal area is not going to have an economy like the centre of London. That's not going to happen. Because you're starting from entirely different places. There are geographic reasons and historical reasons that all get sewn up with it, and also you don't want to throw out the industries that you've got, because nobody's going to be able to just kind of nuke their economy and start it all over again. You have to adapt it over time and evolve it. So it's about looking for the strengths that you've got, looking how you can build on them, and so looking for similar but slightly better performing economies to yours is really critical, because if you can see a path to how you can kind of learn from what they've done and sort of just move your industries in that direction, you'll like to make far more progress than just suddenly planting a flag and declaring that your area is going to be the next financial services mega center in Britain, because it's not. Economies don't typically grow like that unless you can get a huge bank to locate all its operations in your area. We look with that. And so finally, to come back to that point about skills, that changes in industry structure will in turn change skills demand, and you'll need to kind of keep adapting to that, because the industries that we're talking about are always changing their business model as well as they interact with the area and the workforce that you've got. That will change them. And so actually leveling up isn't just a few interventions that you're going to make today. It's going to be an ongoing adaptation over many years. Setting the right course early on is really vital. Sticking to that course is really vital too, but also being fleet of foot in saying, well, actually, we're now getting these businesses emerging and these particular needs that they have, and so how can we meet those on their own ground?
Very interesting. And on that last point, always slightly worrying when these things are political footballs, and of course a change in government, suddenly a change in different ideology and ideas and thoughts, whether the same color government or not, maybe, who knows.
Yeah,
But that's always the big challenge. But I think if we can help you guys, our audience who are on the ground, engaging the coalface of leveling up, it may be called leveling up today, it'll be called something else in a few years time, but hopefully the insights and the ideas and the thoughts here really hold true to just generally driving economic success in your region, and certainly reinforces in my mind the importance between economic planning and skills development. It's obviously very important anyway, but this just really sharpens that chicken and egg nature of having to kind of evolve both in concert with each other, which requires strong, clear local leadership, and might I suggest good, clear data driving that agenda forward. So thank you, Duncan. I really appreciate some really interesting analysis there and some summaries. And the exciting thing is that, of course, we're doing this because we have access to the kinds of information that's allowing us to unlock some of these thoughts and ideas that we want to pass on to you. And of course, as our customers, you have a lot of that same data at your fingertips. So if you're existing customers, we hope this inspires you to continue to dive into your data and your tools like Analyst, that allow you to really understand what your local area looks like, allows you to compare yourself with other areas, and really play that role in connecting key stakeholders around your economy, whether on the education side, the economic development and government side, whether in the third sector or other projects and programs, or you're a major employer in your region. And so our job is to really illuminate that and give you that insight, so you can feed that into your strategy, your planning, and your decision making. And of course, not just inwards, but then sharing that with your community, so you can bring people, whether that be students, whether that be your local citizens and residents, or whether that be your business community. We can really drag people along on this journey together and find a common language. And particularly, you mentioned elements like skills as a key kind of linking factor that can help make the connection between the industries and employers that are driving opportunity with the roles that they're seeking, and ultimately the skills that they need. And so that's kind of why we do what we do, and we continue to do that, whether we're called MZ Burning Glass or Lightcast, for sure. And I think what you raised there just kind of reinforces why I think the work that we do is so critical to the work that you can be doing, which is around complexity. I mentioned regularly, I said it at the beginning, the labor market is becoming ever more complex, and that's a good thing from what we've heard today. That's actually a really good thing if you can see it, if you can understand it, if you can quantify it, if you can visualize it. And that's what we very much try and do with our data. I think some interesting strategies that you mentioned, particularly from an area-wide perspective, of starting to think about your comparators, your similar areas that have maybe been on that journey or a few steps ahead on that increasing complexity journey. So looking at how your infrastructure and what other areas have similar economic infrastructure and how have they evolved that over time. The great thing about our data is it's backward looking, so you can look back in time at some of these regions and understand how their labor markets have evolved, and perhaps start to chart some of that into your own work, or you can set a new path, of course, for others to follow. And that point about playing to strengths, I think, is something that we regularly talk about. But how do you work out what makes your region different? And again, it's not just about inwards looking, but looking at your labor market relative to other regions where you can start to see what your strengths are that you can then build around. And that's something that we've done and talked about over the years through our Strength Finder reporting and in Analyst and other conversations there. So please do, we recognize our data has a big role to play. We want to kind of continue to illuminate and shine a light on some of these kind of bigger picture trends, but the goal is to really put that data into your hands so you can take it down into your day job and your activity. And it's just great to be working with hundreds of education providers, local authorities, LEPs, combined authorities right across the UK, and others who are really driving this forward. So it's exciting to be with you on that journey. And in terms of kind of support materials, etc., the resources that you pulled out, Duncan, actually come from a report that we will be launching shortly. I'm just waiting for the final URL, which I was hoping would be there. Isn't quite there yet, but should be very soon. So we will circulate that in follow-up to this webinar, where you'll be able to access our summary report, as well as some local area specific snapshots that will start to illuminate some of those dimensions that we mentioned there. So that will be with you very imminently in terms of a link, and check out lightcast.io. You'll be taken to the UK site if you're diving in from the UK, or you can select it from the drop down and it'll be listed there as well for you there. And then Duncan, tell us about another initiative that we're driving forward that kind of builds on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we would like to do is, we've done some good groundwork there to kind of build some concept, and we'd like to take that to the next level, because we'd like to move past the obvious of, that there are rich places and there are poor places, and it's really quite hard to move from one to the other and think about those viable paths to improve that we were talking about earlier, about how you work out where this sort of for a given area, what are the different paths that they could reasonably look to change their industry makeup to actually add those capabilities that allow them to level up effectively, and then how can that then be translated into skills data to sort of start thinking about what the gap is that they need to make up as well. And so what we're trying to work towards is a program where we work on a national report which will really go into a lot of depth in that, but also work as part of that with 10 regions to co-sponsor the national report, but also get a report for their region in particular to look at what the options are for them and what the data tells us about what the sort of the potential neighbour, similar areas that they can learn from, and what the differences are, and what the options that implies about industry and skills for their area. And so if anybody on the webinar today is interested, please do get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you about a potential role in getting that program up and running.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Duncan. And just to reinforce that, we are talking to a number of organizations who are interested, who want to really be at the forefront of the leveling up agenda, whether that's because it's seen as a great opportunity or a challenge for the locality. Obviously, there are a number of priority areas that are seeking creative and new ways to drive forward good practice. We think that building on some of the work we just shared there, and with a bit more funding to pull our teams of data scientists in to kind of build on that, and create focal points of 10 or so regions where there is great opportunity or challenge, to really help us dive down and deliver you as a co-sponsor something that works for your own specific agenda, but also helps to build the knowledge bank across the country that others can try and replicate or explore further down the line. So we are actively reaching out, but if you're interested, if you want to very much be seen at the forefront of the leveling up agenda and to be harnessing the great, not just the data that we've got, but the incredible skills that Duncan and his team have, people like Elena Magrini as well on the team, who have spent a lot of time diving into these topics, and we think we can be very helpful, not just to your own mission, but to other activities. So please do reach out, head to lightcast.io, find the contact us page, let us know you're interested, and we will reach out and tell you a bit more about what that looks like and what you can expect in return. So thanks, Duncan, for sharing that. It's an exciting activity there. Just rounding off then, in usual course of promoting a few upcoming activities. So we conclude our leveling up specific focus today, and with these reports, as I mentioned, we will have our next webinar in late July, as you can see there, link on the page. There's some background work we've been doing around artificial intelligence in the UK labour market that we want to share with you, so excited to bring that forward. And of course that could well be a critical part to helping and unlocking levelling up opportunities in some regions, so we will continue to tie that back there. So hope you can join us in July before the summer break as we squeeze that one in. Also, colleagues from our further education team, led by Alex Kennedy, is running a webinar with our good friends over at Western College later this that's tomorrow. Hey, 29th of June, tomorrow. So still time to sign up. The link is at the bottom there, and particularly thinking about helping students with their career pathways. Obviously, as we've been hearing under the leveling up topic, the challenge of bringing and driving students down to areas in which can really drive real change in the community, and the ability to communicate that back through our work with colleges and through the work the colleges are doing, for example, and universities with their students to drive them into a successful, if not complex, labour market for them. So a couple of webinars coming up before we take a well-earned break for summer, and hopefully you do too. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm afraid we don't have time for questions today because I have to dash off for the school run now. So I will be hot-footing over to pick the boys up from school. But thank you, Duncan, very much for some really interesting and engaging content there. And I'm excited to get that report out very soon. And Debbie, thank you for looking after us and hosting us so well. And thank you all for joining us on our inaugural Lightcast webinar. So thanks for joining us, and keep an eye out for some exciting party photos on LinkedIn in due course.
Thank you. Bye.